The year was 1871, and Copper Bend was burning under its own dust. Evening light poured through the haze, turning the main street to liquid amber, heavy with the smell of iron and sweat. Wind scraped along the wooden sidewalks, dragging old wanted posters across the dirt. In the distance, thunder rolled, without rain. Inside the one-room schoolhouse, Eliza Hart stacked thin slates and wiped the chalk dust from her palms. Her fingers were cracked from desert air. Her breath rose faintly white in the cooling dusk. She had been in Copper Bend only 2 months, long enough to learn that silence here carried weight, the kind that settled in bones, not words. On her desk sat a small brass compass, the only thing she'd kept from her late husband. Its glass was cracked, its needle still quivering, as if it sensed a storm coming. She sometimes wondered if it pointed north, or merely back to everything she'd lost. Outside, a horse's hooves slowed, steady and deliberate. She looked up as the shadow filled her doorway. Calder Boone stood framed by the orange light, broad shoulders, dust on his hat, a thin scar tracing down his cheek like a line drawn in anger. His eyes, pale gray, like weathered steel, took in the room without apology. "Evenin', ma'am." His voice was low, almost kind. "Heard you took to teaching out here alone." "I manage," she said, brushing her skirt. "I reckon you do." He tipped his hat back, gaze steady. "Still, nights can turn on a person quick. Wind changes without warning." Something in his tone made her spine stiffen. He wasn't threatening. It was more like a warning shaped by experience. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she said quietly. "But I've lived through worse storms." He studied her for a long moment, the corner of his mouth twitching, like he almost smiled. "This land don't care how much we've lived through. It just keeps testing who's left standing." They stood in the amber quiet, the space between them filled with the hum of dust and the faint clatter of the sign outside. Then softer. "You'll find the nights mean different things out here. I don't say it to scare you. Just keep your lantern lit." He turned to leave, boots grinding on the wooden step. The last of the light slipped down his back, catching on the edge of his revolver. "Mr. Boone," she began, but he was already gone, a darker shape against the dying sun. Eliza watched him ride toward the ridge, the horse's hooves thudding like slow heartbeats. She told herself she wasn't unsettled, yet her hands trembled slightly as she shut the door. The air inside seemed heavier now. A gust rattled the window, scattering papers across the floor. One sheet caught her eye, an old yellowed page torn from a mining notice, stamped with the name Amos Kincaid, Copper Bend's mayor. Scribbled beneath in red ink were 3 words: "Leave while you can." Eliza's breath hitched. She picked it up, folded it once, and tucked it under the compass. Through the cracked glass, the needle twitched violently, spinning once before settling. Not north this time, but west, toward the ridge where Calder Boone had vanished. Outside, the sky broke open into a thin ribbon of black cloud. The wind began to howl down the street, lifting dust into a storm that shimmered gold in the dying light. Eliza crossed the room to bolt the shutters. As she did, the compass clicked softly, its sound sharp and clean, like a heartbeat in the stillness. For a long time she stood in the quiet, the echo of Boone's words curling in her chest. Keep your lantern lit. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the window, a woman too tired to run, too proud to be frightened. And yet, behind her, the shadow on the wall seemed to move, stretching longer as the wind moaned through the cracks. She turned, eyes wide, but there was nothing there, only the faint scent of iron and dust. She whispered into the emptiness, "I'm not afraid," though her voice didn't sound quite like her own. Then, far off, a wolf howled, and from somewhere near the ridge, a single gunshot split the silence. The compass quivered once more, its needle jerking toward the sound. Rain came light and fine before dawn, just enough to turn the dust into a thin paste that clung to boots and the smell of iron. By nightfall, Copper Bend was wrapped in a steady drizzle, the kind that muted every sound but never quite washed the dirt away. The street lamps flickered uncertainly. Somewhere down the road, a door slammed, a horse snorted, and silence followed like an animal waiting to pounce. Eliza Hart stayed late in the schoolhouse, copying the next day's lesson by lamplight. The wick hissed and sputtered as the storm outside pressed its cold breath against the windows. Her shoulders ached. She paused to stretch, the lamplight catching on the brass compass by her elbow. The needle twitched again, restless, as if arguing with the wind. She reached out to steady it, and froze at the sound of boots outside. Slow, heavy, familiar. A knock came, firm but not harsh. When she opened the door, Calder Boone stood there, soaked from hat to heel, rain running down the deep lines of his coat. He held a paper sack in one hand. "Evenin'," he said, voice rough but low, like a man trying not to startle a horse. "Mr. Boone." He lifted the sack a little. "Figured you might need some flour. Store clerk said the last storm ruined the shipment coming from Denver." Eliza hesitated, eyes flicking from the bag to his face. "You didn't have to." "Maybe not," he said, stepping inside before she could object. "But I ain't much good at standing by when someone could use a hand." He set the sack on the desk beside the compass. Rain dripped off his hat brim, pattering into the quiet. For a moment, neither spoke. The room smelled of wet leather and lamp oil. Calder looked around, taking in the thin curtains, the patched roof, the blackboard washed half clean. "You teach here alone?" "I prefer it that way," she said. "That's a fancy way of saying nobody offered help." She bristled. "I don't ask for what I can do myself." He nodded once, slow. "That's the kind that lasts longest out here." When he turned toward her, the lamp's flame flared, painting his face in gold and shadow. His eyes, that weathered gray again, softened a little. "I meant what I said yesterday," he murmured. "This land don't forgive loneliness. It eats it." "You keep your door locked at night?" "I don't keep company past sundown." "Maybe you should start." His tone wasn't suggestive. It was something older, heavier, carved from worry. She wanted to tell him to leave, to keep his distance, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said quietly, "What do you really want, Mr. Boone?" He tilted his head. "Peace of mind. For me. Maybe for you, too." Eliza's lips parted, but she found no reply. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, shaking the glass panes in their frames. Calder pulled a chair out and sat, the wood creaking under his weight. "You remind me of someone I once knew," he said finally. "Your wife?" He shook his head. "A woman who thought the world would make room for her because she meant well. It didn't." Eliza folded her arms. "I'm not that woman." He smiled faintly. "I figured." Lightning cracked across the window, spilling brief daylight through the room. For an instant, the compass gleamed, the needle pointing not north but west again, toward the ridge. Calder noticed it too, his eyes narrowing. "That old thing ever stopped twitching?" "Never," she said. "It belonged to my husband. He died following where it led." Calder leaned forward, elbows on knees. Maybe he was looking for something he shouldn't have found. Eliza's gaze hardened. Or maybe he was just trying to come home. They stared at each other for a long heartbeat. Two people balanced between suspicion and recognition. Then Calder exhaled, slow, like surrender. "Copper Bend ain't kind to strangers, Miss Hart," he said softly. "You'd best remember that." He stood, the chair scraping back. "I'll check on the roof tomorrow. It's startin' to bow." Before she could protest, he reached for the door. The rain had eased to a drizzle. He paused at the threshold, turning his head just enough to catch her in the lamplight. "I ain't sayin' you can't stand on your own," he said, voice low. "Just, the wind's changin'. You'll feel it soon." Then he was gone, swallowed by the hiss of rain and the echo of his boots down the boardwalk. Eliza stood there, heart thudding slow and heavy. She shut the door, but the sound of his words lingered, like smoke. She turned the lamp down low and reached for the compass again. The needle trembled once, twice, then stopped dead, pointing toward the window. A draft slipped through the cracks, carrying something that wasn't the smell of rain. Burnt wood, faint and sour. She frowned, crossing the room to look out. The street was empty, puddles gleaming like dark mirrors. Then the lamplight caught on a scrap of paper pinned to the doorframe by a nail. She pulled it free. 3 uneven words written in charcoal. "Know your place." Her pulse quickened. She looked out toward the ridge where Boone's figure had vanished and whispered, "What are you dragging back with you, Mr. Boone?" Outside, the rain stopped altogether. The silence that followed was worse. The compass needle shuddered once and pointed west again. Morning broke cold and silver, the kind that made the air taste like tin. Fog rolled low across the valley, wrapping the empty streets of Copper Bend in a quiet that felt almost deliberate. Somewhere, a hammer rang from the blacksmith's yard, a lonely, rhythmic pulse against the distance. Eliza Hart walked the fence line behind the schoolhouse, her boots sinking into damp soil. She'd barely slept. The charcoal words from the night before still echoed behind her ribs. "Know your place." The letters had smeared across her fingers when she'd torn the paper down. black dust clinging like a bruise. Now the fog pressed close, soft as breath. She gathered kindling for the classroom stove, the cold gnawing through her sleeves. That's when she heard it. A sharp, uneven snort, followed by the drag of hooves on frozen mud. A mare stood at the edge of the schoolyard, thin and trembling, one foreleg streaked dark with blood. The animal's coat, once chestnut, was dulled by dirt and rain. Its eyes rolled white with fear, but didn't bolt. Eliza froze, her basket tilting in her hand. "Easy there," she whispered. "You're all right." The mare blew a rough breath, sides heaving. Eliza set the basket down and stepped closer, her boots quiet on the wet grass. She'd grown up with horses back east, knew how to move slow, steady, never stare too hard. She held out her palm. The mare hesitated, then lowered its head. Its breath was warm, smelling of rain and metal. Eliza touched its cheek, feeling the tremor beneath the skin. "You poor thing," she murmured. "Who left you out here?" She tore a strip from her petticoat and crouched to wrap the wound, careful not to spook it. The fog thickened, swallowing sound, until only the steady rhythm of her breath filled the air. When she tied the knot, she smiled faintly. "You'll be all right, sweetheart. I'll call you Juniper. You look like you belong to the wind." Juniper flicked an ear, then leaned lightly into her touch, as if answering. Behind her, a voice broke the stillness. "That horse walked half the county to find you." Eliza turned, heart jolting. Calder Boone leaned on the fence post, hat pulled low, raincoat hanging open. He'd been watching, maybe long enough to see everything. "You scared me," she said, more breath than words. "Didn't mean to," he replied. "Just passed by, saw her limping. Figured you'd have her sorted before I tied my reins." "She's hurt," Eliza said, "but calm. Someone must have abandoned her." "Or drove her off," Calder said, eyes narrowing. "Sometimes a horse gets left behind when there's trouble worth forgettin'." She frowned. "Trouble like what?" He shrugged. "Land disputes. People claim what don't belong to them. Happens all the time near the old mines." There was a weight in his tone, something unspoken, shaped by more than rumor. "Does everything out here lead back to the mines?" she asked. "Most things that rot start there," he replied simply. They stood in silence, the fog curling around them like breath. Juniper shifted, resting her muzzle on Eliza's shoulder. The warmth of the animal seeped through her thin shawl, grounding her in a way that felt unreasonably human. Calder's gaze softened. "You've got a way with broken things, Miss Hart." She glanced at him, uncertain. "That's not a compliment where I come from." "Out here," he said, "it's the highest kind there is." Something fragile flickered between them. Not romance yet. Just recognition. The kind that happens when two people realize they've both been left to mend what others have destroyed. He straightened, tugging at his gloves. "I'll have my man bring you some feed and salve. Horse'll heal quicker that way." "You don't have to." "I know," he said, "but I'm gonna." Before she could thank him, he was already walking away, his boots sinking into the mist. She watched until he vanished beyond the ridge, his shape swallowed by fog. Only his voice drifted back, carried by the wind. "Keep that compass close. The ground's changin' faster than you think." Eliza frowned, turning toward the schoolhouse. The compass sat by the window inside, its glass catching what little light remained. The needle quivered, not north this time, but west again. The same direction Calder had gone. A shiver passed through her. When she looked back to Juniper, the mare had settled near the porch, chewing calmly on dry hay. Eliza knelt beside her, resting a hand against her neck. The steady heartbeat beneath her palm felt like a promise she didn't yet understand. For the first time since she'd arrived in Copper Bend, she didn't feel completely alone. That night, as the fog lifted and the stars crawled back into the sky, Eliza lit a single lantern and set it in the window. The flame wavered, gold and small, fighting the dark. From somewhere out in the distance, a horse answered with a low whinny, soft, familiar, protective. Eliza smiled, the sound easing something tight in her chest. But when she turned to leave the classroom, she noticed a thin trail of muddy footprints leading to the door, too heavy for her own. She stared at them for a long moment, pulse quickening, before whispering, "You said the wind's changin', Mr. Boone. Maybe it already has." Night fell quiet but uneasy, the kind that breathed through the cracks of old boards and whispered against the glass. The storm had passed, leaving the smell of wet earth and iron behind. Inside the one-room schoolhouse, Eliza Hart sat at her desk, sleeves rolled, stitching a tear in one of the children's slates. The lantern's flame swayed with the draft, painting her shadow across the wall. Tall, fragile, and alone. Rainwater dripped rhythmically from the roof, one drop at a time, landing into a tin bucket by her feet. It had been leaking for days. She'd meant to fix it herself, but each evening she found one excuse or another. Too dark, too cold, too late. And maybe, somewhere deep down, she just wanted to hear the steady sound of something falling and finding its way. The way she had. Her gaze drifted to the window. Juniper, the mare, slept by the porch rail, her silhouette calm beneath the fading moonlight. Beyond her, the plains shimmered silver and black. Everything seemed still, except for the wind, restless as ever. When the clock ticked past midnight, she finally rose, blew out the lantern, and slipped into her shawl. The silence pressed close, thick and humming. Then, faintly, through the hush, came the sound of hammering. She froze. 1, 2, 3 deliberate strikes. The rhythm was slow, practiced, and near, just above the roofline. Her pulse quickened. She reached for the poker by the stove and edged toward the door. The night air bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside. The moon had slipped behind a cloud, and the sky glowed faintly gray. Neither light nor dark enough to see clearly. Then another strike. Clang. Eliza craned her neck upward. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be the wind, until she caught the faint outline of a man against the clouds. Broad shoulders, familiar stance. "Mr. Boone?" she called softly. The hammer paused, then resumed, slower now, careful not to echo. She stood in the damp grass, half wanting to shout, half afraid to break whatever spell hung over this hour. When the last nail met the beam, silence fell again. The man on the roof straightened, looked down, and said only one thing, his voice low, steady, rate slow, volume soft. "Storm's coming sooner than you think." Then he climbed down the back side of the building and vanished into the night. Eliza stood there, breath clouding the cold air, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. Somewhere nearby, Juniper stirred and snorted softly, as if to confirm it had really happened. She didn't move for a long time. The hammering still echoed faintly in her chest. When she went back inside, she noticed the compass on her desk trembling again. The needle spun twice before locking, pointing west toward Boone's Draw. She set the poker aside and sat slowly, her fingers tracing the rough wood of the desk. Something inside her shifted, not quite trust, but its shadow. She whispered, almost to herself, "You fix a roof for someone, Mr. Boone, and they'll never forget it." Outside, wind pressed against the new boards. The leak had stopped. The steady drip of the tin bucket was gone, replaced by stillness, the kind that holds its breath before dawn. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but her dreams were uneasy. Flashes of her late husband Thomas crossing a muddy creek, the compass in his hand, his voice fading into the roar of unseen thunder. When she woke, the image clung to her like mist, the compass needle shaking in his palm before vanishing into the dark. By morning, the sunlight slanted gold through the clean, dry roof. The air smelled faintly of cedar, freshly cut wood. The boards over the ceiling beam were smooth, straight, and fitted by a craftsman's hand. No one came forward to claim the work. Eliza stood beneath the repaired rafters, fingers pressed against the seams. The nails were still warm from the sun. Juniper neighed softly outside, nosing the window. Eliza smiled. "Seems we both got someone looking out for us," she murmured. She tidied the desks before class began, humming a tune she hadn't dared sing since Thomas died. The melody felt foreign at first, then familiar, a thread of memory pulled back into the world. As the children filed in, their laughter filled the room, pushing away the ghost of the night before. But when she reached for the lesson book, something new caught her eye. A small sprig of juniper lying on the windowsill, still wet with dew. No footprints marked the floor, no sign of entry, just that single green twig, left like a promise. Eliza lifted it carefully, the scent sharp and clean. She tucked it into the compass case. For the first time since she'd arrived in Copper Bend, the air inside the schoolhouse felt safe. That evening, as the sun went down, she stepped outside. The sky burned copper and rose. Far on the ridge, a horse moved against the light. Rider silent, hat brim low. He didn't stop, didn't wave, only turned his mount and disappeared into the hills. The wind shifted then, brushing her hair across her face. She smiled softly to the horizon. Thank you, she whispered. The compass clicked once in her pocket, as if answering. The afternoon light was thin and white, spilling through the classroom windows like water through muslin. Dust motes hung in the air, slow and unbothered, while the children's voices faded into the distance, laughter trailing off toward home. The quiet that followed felt almost deliberate, as though the room itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. Eliza Hart lingered at her desk, sorting slates and pencils. The repaired roof creaked softly above her, its scent of fresh cedar still sweet in the heat. She glanced up, half expecting to hear that soft hammering again, but there was only the whisper of wind against the glass. When she stepped outside, Calder Boone was waiting near the fence, one hand on his horse's bridle, the other holding something small, wrapped in a cloth. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she caught the glint of a smile before he spoke. "Brought you something," he said simply. Eliza wiped her hands on her skirt. "I hope it's not more flour. I've still got half a sack from the last time you tried to feed me." He chuckled. "Not flour. This one won't go stale." He handed her the bundle. Inside was a wooden spoon, smooth and pale, carved by hand, with the delicate shape of a juniper leaf along the handle. The workmanship was clumsy in places, but sincere, the kind of thing that took patience, not talent. Eliza turned it over in her hands, the grain warm beneath her fingers. "It's lovely," she said softly. Calder shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just figured you shouldn't have to eat off tin. Wood's kinder." Her smile came slow but genuine. "You made this?" "Maybe," he said, looking out toward the hills. "Maybe I just found it laying around." Then I suppose I should thank whoever carved it." "Guess you just did." Their eyes met for a moment too long, both of them caught off guard by the quiet that followed. The wind stirred between them, carrying the smell of sage and sun-baked earth. Calder cleared his throat. "How's the mare?" "Better. She's calm now. Follows me around like a shadow." "Smart animal. Picks good company. Time for Hunstone." Eliza laughed, a sound small but bright. "You're terrible at compliments." "I get that a lot." He turned, leaning on the fence rail. "You keep busy here. Not much time for anything else." "I like work that has meaning." He nodded. "Sometimes that's all that keeps a soul upright." For a while they just stood there, two figures in the long golden light, surrounded by open space and the sound of cicadas rising like distant static. The stillness between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was something earned, something steady. Then Calder spoke again, quieter this time. "Folks in town been talking. About you. About us, maybe." Eliza's shoulders stiffened. "I expected as much." "Don't pay 'em no mind," he said quickly. "They talk because they got nothing worth saying. But I figured you ought to hear it from me." "Thank you," she said. "But I've learned not to flinch at gossip. Words only bite when you feed them." He looked at her then, really looked. "You ever get tired of fightin' alone, Miss Hart?" She hesitated. "Every day." The wind paused, holding its breath. Then she added, "But I keep doing it anyway." Calder nodded once, as if that answer was more honest than he'd hoped for. That's what makes you dangerous to the kind who'd rather see you break. Eliza tucked the spoon into her satchel, feeling its weight like a small heartbeat. You sound like you've met those kinds before. I've been those kinds before, he said quietly. His voice carried something like regret. Not sharp, but deep, worn smooth by time. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. The way he looked at the horizon told her enough. Good men don't talk about their past, she said gently. Maybe, but they try to do better by their future. The silence that followed felt less like distance and more like understanding. Somewhere behind them, Juniper whinnied, soft and low, as if sensing the quiet turning of hearts. Calder tipped his hat. I best head back before dark. Storm clouds brewing west of the ridge. Eliza nodded. Thank you for the spoon. He smiled, a rare, full smile this time. Warm, fleeting, almost boyish. Ain't much, but maybe it'll last longer than flour. As he mounted up, she called after him, Mr. Boone? He turned. If the wind changes again, she said, you'll let me know, won't you? He hesitated, studying her face. You'll feel it same as I do, Miss Hart. You just don't know it yet. Then he rode off, hooves thudding steady against the hard earth. When the sound faded, Eliza went inside. The room was quiet, the light gone soft and gray. She placed the carved spoon beside the brass compass on her desk. For a moment, both objects caught the last of the sunset, wood and metal glowing side by side. The needle twitched once, steadying itself toward the west. And in the distance, barely heard, thunder rolled again. Not close, but coming. Eliza pressed her palm against the compass lid and whispered, Whatever storm you're warning me about, Mr. Boone, I hope you're ready for it too. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke from somewhere unseen. The first crow of the evening cut through the stillness. Then, silence. The moon came up pale and cold, hanging low over Copper Bend, like a coin worn thin from too many hands. The town was mostly asleep, just the slow shuffle of boots in front of the saloon, the soft clang of a distant bell marking the hour. Wind rolled down from the ridge, carrying the scent of mesquite and rain long gone. Inside the schoolhouse, Eliza Hart trimmed the wick of her lamp and bent over her papers. Her students had gone home hours ago, but she stayed, as she often did, correcting lines of crooked handwriting by lamplight. Each letter, each shaky loop, felt like a small rebellion against the emptiness of this town. Juniper dozed outside the window, her breath steaming in the chill. The wooden spoon and the brass compass lay side by side on the desk, catching faint gold from the flame. A creak outside made Eliza lift her head. Then, another. Slow, deliberate. She went still, the pen freezing mid-word. The noise wasn't wind. She blew out the lamp, leaving the room in blue darkness. Her pulse quickened. Through the window, she saw a shadow move, tall, broad-shouldered, but not Calder's. This one stood wrong. She rose, reached for the poker by the stove again, and pressed herself to the wall, Her breath was shallow, her fingers trembling only once before tightening on the iron handle. A hand touched the doorknob, turned it slightly. Then, silence. Eliza's throat constricted. She waited. The shadow shifted again, then stepped back into the dark. After a few heartbeats, the sound of boots receded, swallowed by the night. When she dared to open the door, there was nothing, only the creak of the hanging sign outside and the rustle of wind through grass. But nailed to the wood frame, half torn by the breeze, was another note. She pulled it free. Leave before it's too late. The handwriting was the same as before, but heavier now, more desperate. Eliza stood there, the note trembling in her hand, until a voice behind her said quietly, "You shouldn't open the door alone at night." She spun, heart in her throat. Calder Boone stepped from the shadows by the porch, coat damp with dew. His eyes glinted under the brim of his hat, calm but alert. "I saw someone walking this way. Thought I'd check. You scared me half to death. Better me than whoever left that." He nodded toward the note. Eliza hesitated. "You've been watching the schoolhouse?" "Not watching," he said. "Just making sure it stays standing." Something in his tone, tired, sincere, softened her anger. She stepped aside to let him in. The warm air of the classroom closed around them, faintly smelling of chalk and cedar. Calder's boots left small puddles on the floor. He looked around, scanning every shadow before setting his hat on the peg. "Who'd want to frighten a teacher?" she asked quietly. "People who make their living off fear," he said. "The kind that don't like books or light." "Amos Kincaid?" Calder met her gaze. "Wouldn't be the first time he drove someone off." Eliza swallowed. "You seem to know a lot about the wrong kind of people, Mr. Boone." His jaw tightened. "Used to be one." She stared at him, startled by his honesty. "Used to be?" He nodded slowly. "Did some things I ain't proud of. Rode with men who took what they wanted. Land, silver, blood. Thought I'd left that behind." Her voice softened. "And now?" He looked at her then, the gray of his eyes unguarded. "Now I build fences instead of breaking them. But trouble don't care who you used to be. It still knows your name." The silence between them was heavy, but not cold. It felt like the space between two truths, hers and his, finally close enough to touch. Eliza reached for the compass on the desk, the metal cool under her fingertips. "Then let's find which way trouble's comin' from." Calder smiled faintly. "You got more grit than this whole town combined, Miss Hart. Grit doesn't stop bullets." "No," he said, taking the compass gently from her hand. "But it does keep you standin' after they miss." For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, watching the needle tremble. It spun twice, then stopped, not north but west, toward the ridge. "That's where I'll start looking," Calder murmured. "Alone?" He looked at her, expression unreadable. "Wouldn't risk bringing you into it." "You already did," she said softly. The words caught him off guard. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Then he nodded once, a silent promise. He turned to leave, hat in hand. "Lock the door behind me. I'll be back before dawn." She hesitated. "Mr. Boone?" He glanced back. "Be careful, please." He gave a single nod, then disappeared into the night. Eliza waited at the door long after he was gone, listening to the sound of his horse fading toward the ridge. Then she locked the door and sat at her desk again, staring at the flicker of the lamp. Juniper shifted outside, uneasy. Eliza opened her notebook, wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page: "If I must stay." She didn't know why, but the act steadied her hands. When she looked up again, the compass needle had stilled completely. For the first time, it pointed not west or north, but directly toward the school's front door. She felt her chest tighten. Something, or someone, was drawing closer. Outside, thunder grumbled faintly on the horizon, rolling over the ridge like a warning. Sunday dawned clean and sharp, the kind of morning when light sliced through everything that tried to hide. Bells rang from the chapel at the far end of Copper Bend, slow and steady, the sound carrying over frost-silvered roofs and quiet streets. Eliza Hart stood by the classroom window, watching the town stir to life. Children in patched coats chased one another past the well. A wagon creaked toward the church, its wheels crunching the thin ice crusted over the dirt road. She pressed her hand against the glass. The world felt momentarily peaceful, but that peace, she'd learned, was the kind that came before a reckoning. A knock sounded behind her, not hurried, familiar. When she opened the door, Calder Boone stood there, hat in hand, eyes downcast. His coat carried the pale dust of a long ride, and his voice when he spoke was quieter than usual. "Morning, Miss Hart. Mind if I borrow a bit of your time?" Eliza stepped aside. "Always," she said. He hesitated on the threshold, like a man not sure if he deserved to cross it. When he finally did, his boots made no sound on the worn wood floor. He didn't sit. He just stared at the blackboard. "You teach every day?" "When the children come. When they don't, I teach myself." Calder gave a short nod. "That's what I'm here for." She frowned, uncertain. "To learn?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Guess there's no easy way to say it. I can read a bit, printed words, signs, but handwritin'?" He shook his head. "Might as well be another language." Eliza blinked, surprised by the admission. Calder Boone, the man who spoke with that sure weight of someone who'd built and broken more than most, couldn't read. She stepped closer, gently, not pitying, just present. "You don't owe anyone an apology for that." He looked at her then, eyes gray as morning steel. "Maybe not. But I owe myself something. This town, this life, I can't let other men write my fate for me anymore." Eliza felt a stir of warmth in her chest, admiration, but also something deeper. She pulled out a slate and piece of chalk, motioning him toward the desk. "Then let's begin," she said. "Time 7 hums." Calder hesitated, rough hands hovering awkwardly over the slate. "Ain't sure where to start." "Start with your name." He pressed the chalk down too hard. It squeaked, snapped in half. He muttered under his breath, frustrated. Eliza smiled. "Gentler. The board listens better when you don't fight it." He tried again, slower this time. The letters came crooked but alive. Calder. She traced the first letter with her fingertip. Good. The rest will follow the same way everything worth keepin' does. With patience. He met her gaze, a quiet awe there. "You really think so?" "I've seen rough hands do fine work," she said softly. "You built fences, didn't you? Built a roof that doesn't leak." He looked down, almost embarrassed. "Didn't think you noticed." "I did. And I know what it means to fix something without being asked." For a moment, neither spoke. The space between them felt fragile, sacred in its stillness. The ticking of the small wall clock was the only sound. Then, almost without realizing, she reached for his hand. "Hold the chalk like this." Her fingers wrapped lightly around his, guiding the movement. Their hands moved together, tracing another word. Light. Calder's breath hitched, barely audible. His hand trembled slightly beneath hers. "Why that word?" he asked quietly. "Because it's what this room needs," she said. He smiled then, the smallest, truest smile she'd seen from him. "Guess that's what we both need." When she let go, he kept his palm open on the desk, the ghost of her touch still there. Outside, the chapel bell rang again, slower now, like a heartbeat. Eliza turned toward the sound, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine something beyond survival. Calder stood, setting the slate aside. "You got a gift for making a man forget the weight he carries." She laughed softly. "Or maybe I just remind him he doesn't have to carry it alone." He took a step closer. "You ever get tired of people telling you to be careful?" "All the time," she said. "Time for mums." "Then let me be the one who says you don't have to be." Their eyes met. Two storm fronts colliding in quiet understanding. Neither moved closer, yet the air between them felt charged, alive. Then a sound broke the stillness, the crunch of hooves outside, stopping at the fence. Calder's expression hardened. Through the window, 3 men on horseback sat waiting, their faces shadowed beneath wide hats, eyes fixed on the schoolhouse. The one in the middle lifted his hand in a mock salute before turning his horse toward the ridge. Eliza's breath caught. "Who are they?" Calder's jaw tightened. "Old ghosts," he said. "Ones I thought were buried." She turned to him, the echo of fear sharp in her chest. "And if they're not?" He looked at her, steady, unflinching. "Then I'll bury them right." Outside, the men disappeared into the dust, their laughter faint and cruel. Inside, the compass on her desk began to tremble again, the needle spinning faster than she'd ever seen. Calder's voice dropped to a whisper. "The wind's changing again, Miss Hart." Eliza's hand brushed the compass, trying to still it. Then we'll face it together. For a moment, the storm outside and the stillness within seemed to merge, the fragile peace of two souls on the edge of something vast and dangerous. The next few days brought no peace to Copper Bend. The wind that swept in from the ridge carried fine silver dust from the abandoned mines, coating everything, fences, windows, even the church bell, in a thin, ghostly shimmer. By dusk, it looked as if the whole town had been glazed in ash. Eliza Hart stood outside the schoolhouse, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. She could taste metal in the air, that bitter tang that came before trouble. Inside, the children had gone home early, frightened by the rumors that rolled through town like tumbleweeds. Talk of outlaws seen near the ridge, of a man named Marcus Vale asking questions about Calder Boone. She turned at the sound of hooves. Calder rode in slow from the west, his horse dark with sweat. His coat was dusted silver, his jaw set hard. "You've been gone since dawn," she said, half relief, half rebuke. "Where were you?" "Checkin' the ridge," he replied. "There's movement up near the old Silver Creek mine, men campin' where they shouldn't be." Eliza's pulse jumped. "The ones we saw?" He nodded. "Marcus and his lot. Vale used to ride with me." The name hung in the air, like a bad taste. Calder dismounted, tied his horse to the post. "He ain't the forgiving kind, Miss Hart. I put a stop to one of his games years back. Blood and silver both changed hands. Guess he thinks I owe him for it." She folded her arms. "And what does that have to do with me?" He hesitated, looking away. "Everything. The mine he's squattin' on sits right under Copper Bend's land claims. You're teachin' in the only building that sits clean on that boundary." Eliza blinked. "You mean—" "I mean that if he wants the mine, he's got to scare you off first." A chill crawled up her spine. "That's why the notes—" Calder nodded grimly. "And that's why he'll keep comin'." Silence pressed between them, broken only by the low whicker of juniper by the fence. Eliza swallowed. "Then what do we do?" Calder rubbed the back of his neck. "We start by knowin' who's pullin' the strings. Vale's too smart to act alone." As if summoned by the thought, Dr. Ruth, Avery appeared at the end of the road, her dark riding skirt flapping in the wind. She guided her mare up to them, face pale but calm. "Miss Hart," she called, dismounting. "I need a word. Both of you, actually." Inside the classroom, she laid a stack of weathered documents on the desk. "These were found in the county office," she said, "when I was treatin' the clerk's wife. He's been holdin' them for Kincaid, papers tied to an old mining claim." Eliza leaned forward. Her late husband's name, Thomas Grace, was scrawled across the top page. Her chest tightened. "My husband? He never told me." Ruth nodded. "That's not all. There's another name here. Marcus Vale. Looks like Thomas signed a deed with him, either by force or deceit. The land under the mine might legally belong to you now, Eliza." The room spun for a moment. Eliza gripped the edge of the desk. "So that's why they're after me." Calder cursed under his breath. "They're trying to erase you from the map." Ruth looked from one to the other. You'll need proof that the deed's false. I can get word to Marshal Orrin Pike. He's stationed 2 towns east, but it'll take time. Calder nodded. Then we buy time. Eliza met his gaze. And how do you suggest we do that? He gave a thin, humorless smile. By looking mean enough that they think twice. That night, wind screamed across the valley. The schoolhouse trembled under its force, shutters rattling like bones. Eliza sat at her desk, candle guttering, while Calder checked the rifle by the window. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. He looked over his shoulder. Ain't planning on leaving. I'm not your responsibility. He turned fully then, his voice steady but low. You're part of this town now. That's reason enough. Their eyes met. The storm outside echoing the one building inside her chest. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need saving. But the truth was, she'd already begun to trust to the safety of his shadow. The wind hit harder, shaking the door. Calder crossed the room and set a chair under the latch. You get some rest. I'll keep watch. She nodded, though her heart refused to slow. You think they'll come tonight? Not yet, he said. Men like Vale wait till fear's done most of the work. Outside, thunder rolled over the ridge, a long, low growl that made the lamp flame shudder. Eliza stood, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and watched him. He looked different in the lamplight, older, gentler somehow, though the lines on his face spoke of every mile he'd ridden alone. She reached for the wooden spoon on the desk, turning it in her hands, tracing the carved juniper leaves. You ever wish you'd taken a different road? Calder looked up. Every time I see a good one passing by. Something in his tone stopped her breath. Neither spoke again for a long while. The wind howled, rain whispered against the panes, and the compass on the shelf trembled faintly, its needle once more pointing west. When sleep finally came for her, it came soft and shallow. And in the thin place between waking and dreaming, she thought she heard a voice, her husband's, distant and broken, saying, Don't trust the silver, Eliza. It always stains the hands that hold it. She woke to silence, heart racing, candle nearly spent. Calder sat near the window, rifle resting across his knees, watching the first pale light of dawn crawl over the horizon. He didn't look back when he said, Storm's only just startin'. Dawn came weak and colorless, draining the world of warmth. Copper Bend lay half buried in fog, the sun struggling behind a thin sheet of white. The church bell rang once, dull and uncertain, as though it too feared to stir the air. Inside the schoolhouse, the fire had burned low. Eliza Hart woke to the sound of juniper pawing the ground outside, restless. The air smelled of smoke and iron, faint but wrong. Calder Boone was gone. On the chair near the door, his coat was folded neatly, and beneath it lay a note scrawled in his heavy hand. Back by noon. Keep your lantern lit. She traced the words with her thumb. His handwriting was slow, uneven, the product of a man teaching himself what pride had once refused to learn. She smiled softly, before the unease returned. Juniper neighed again, sharper this time. Eliza stepped to the window and saw, nailed to the fence, a sealed envelope. The wax was cracked, the paper old and yellowed. Her name was written in her late husband's hand. Eliza Grace. Her blood ran cold. She tore it open, fingers trembling. Inside was a folded deed, brittle with age, and a letter. The words were smeared in places, as if written in haste. If you read this, the claim is no longer safe. They've found out. I signed under duress, Vale and Kincaid both. There's more beneath the school than they know, and more they'll kill to bury. Don't trust anyone who rides under the Boone name. The final line struck like a bullet. Burn this letter, or it'll burn you. Eliza sank into her chair, the paper trembling between her hands. She could almost hear Thomas's voice again, that soft preacher's calm he carried even when the world went crooked. But this wasn't calm. This was fear. The door creaked open behind her. "Easy," a voice said. Not Calder's, but Dr. Ruth Avery. Her expression tightened when she saw the letter. "Where'd you get that?" Eliza handed it to her. It was left on the fence. Ruth read fast, eyes narrowing. "Thomas wrote this?" "It's his hand." The doctor set the letter down and exhaled, slow. "Then we're deeper in it than I thought." Eliza looked up sharply. "You know something, don't you?" Ruth hesitated. "Only that there were whispers about a hidden shaft beneath the Copper Bend school lot. Miners claimed it led to a second vein, one not on the maps." Eliza stared at the floorboards beneath her boots. "Beneath us?" Ruth nodded. "If that's true, the letter means more than just fear. It's proof. And whoever sent it knows exactly where to hurt you." A gust of wind rattled the shutters. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the air. Eliza folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside the compass case. "Then it stays with me." Ruth frowned. "You should hand it to the marshal." "I will, when Calder returns." Ruth's gaze softened. "You trust him." Eliza met her eyes. "I do." The doctor's voice dropped low. "Then pray your husband was wrong about the Boones." Before Eliza could answer, the ground trembled, faint but certain. From somewhere to the west came the echo of hoofbeats, many of them, rolling like distant thunder. She and Ruth stepped onto the porch just as a group of riders appeared through the fog. Marcus Vale rode in front, his coat black, his grin sharp as a blade. He pulled up short, dust swirling around his boots. "Mornin', Miss Hart," he drawled. "Fine schoolhouse you got. Shame if it were to collapse." Eliza straightened. "You've no right to be here." Vale tipped his hat. "Now that's where you're wrong. See? I got a claim says otherwise. Signed by your own husband." Ruth stepped forward. "That claim's forged, and you know it." Vale's smile never faltered. "Maybe, but proof's a funny thing. Easy to lose, hard to keep, especially in a fire." At the last word, he tossed something at Eliza's feet, a spent matchstick, still smoking. Her breath caught. "Where's Calder?" "Ridin' hard," Vale said. "Found him pokin' round my mine. We had ourselves a talk." Eliza's voice broke. "You didn't—" "Oh, he's breathin'. For now. Man's got grit. I'll give him that. Told me to tell you something." Vale leaned down in the saddle, his grin fading. "Said you'd know where to find what he couldn't." Before she could reply, he wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following in a spray of dust. Ruth grabbed Eliza's arm. "We need to move. Now." Eliza shook her head, eyes blazing. "No. If Calder said that, then he meant the letter." She crossed to the desk, yanked open the drawers. One of them jammed halfway. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom, was another envelope. She tore it free, unfolding a second deed, this one newer, signed not by Thomas, but by Prudence Crowley, Kincaid's bookkeeper. A faint map was sketched along the margin, a shaft marked beneath the schoolhouse, labeled C.B. Vane. Ruth stared. He was right. It's all here. Eliza's voice trembled. Then this isn't about the school. It's about what's buried under it. Outside, thunder cracked, closer now, rolling over the ridge. Juniper reared, neighing in panic. Eliza clutched the compass, its needle spinning wildly as if caught in the storm's pull. Ruth grabbed her arm. "We can't stay here!" Eliza looked toward the horizon, and in the flash of lightning, she saw a lone rider cresting the ridge. Her breath caught. "It's him!" Calder, bloodied but upright, rode hard through the storm, his silhouette cutting through the rain. Ruth's voice was sharp. "Get inside!" Eliza turned toward the door just as another thunderclap split the sky, but this one carried a sound beneath it. Gunfire. The window shattered. A bullet hissed past, splintering the frame. Eliza ducked, heart hammering. Through the smoke and chaos, she clutched the compass to her chest. "You said the wind was changing, Mr. Boone," she whispered. "Let's see where it takes us now." Rain swept across Copper Bend like a curtain of silver, blurring the edges of everything it touched. Inside the small schoolhouse, Eliza Hart crouched behind the desk, the compass clutched tight in her palm. Dr. Ruth Avery reloaded her revolver beside the window, jaw set and eyes sharp. Outside, hooves pounded through the mud. Marcus Vale's men circled, shouting through the storm. Each flash of lightning revealed their silhouettes, dark, hungry shapes closing in. Then a horse's gallop cut through the chaos. The door burst open, and Calder Boone stumbled in, soaked and bleeding. "They're coming from both sides," he rasped. "They want the deeds." Eliza caught his arm. "You shouldn't have come alone." He half smiled. "Didn't. Brought a rifle." Bullets shattered the window. Eliza ducked as splinters rained down. Calder fired once, twice. 2 men fell in the yard. "They'll try to burn us out," he said. Dr. Avery braced the door with a desk. "We can't hold long." "We won't have to," Calder answered. "The marshal's close." Lightning cracked, revealing Vale across the yard, grinning under his black hat, gun raised. Thunder answered the shot. Calder staggered back, shoulder torn. Eliza cried out, pressing her hand to the wound. "I'm fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Get the letter." "I'm not leaving you." "Then sing something, to keep the dark away." She looked at him, then did. Softly at first, then louder, the old hymn her mother once taught her. Her voice trembled but didn't break, floating through rain and thunder like a prayer. Outside, the gunfire faltered. Even Vale hesitated, unnerved by the sound. Calder rose, steadied his aim, and fired. One shot. True. Vale fell into the mud. Silence followed, broken only by rain and Eliza's fading song. Marshal Pike's lanterns glowed on the ridge as his men rode in, rounding up the outlaws. Dr. Avery stepped outside, shouting orders. Calder leaned against the doorframe, blood seeping through his sleeve, but smiling faintly. "That song," he murmured. "Ain't heard anything that pure in years." Eliza knelt beside him. "My mother's hymnal. I thought I lost it." Calder reached into his coat and pulled out a small oilcloth bundle. Inside lay the weathered hymnal, its pages warped but intact. "I bought it back," he said quietly. "Figured it belonged with you." Her eyes glistened. "You already gave it back. Just now." He smiled, weary but sure. "Guess light finds its way home." By morning the storm had passed. The town gathered to hear Marshal Pike read Vale's signed confession, proof that Kincaid and Prudence Crowley had forged the land deeds. The rain-washed air smelled of cedar and renewal. Eliza stood beside Calder, his arm bandaged, her hand resting over his. When it was over, she looked down at the hymnal in her arms. A single line glowed beneath the water-stained page. "The light shineth in darkness." She whispered, "It does." And for the first time since she came to Copper Bend, the morning felt like grace. Dawn stretched slow over Copper Bend, soft and gold, melting the last of the storm. The valley steamed with new light, mist rising from the grass, drops of rain sliding off fence rails like beads of glass. The air smelled of cedar smoke and wet earth. Eliza Hart stood outside the schoolhouse, her dress damp at the hem, watching the sun climb over the ridge. Calder Boone leaned against the porch rail beside her, arm bandaged, hat pulled low to shade his eyes. Every now and then he winced when he moved, but said nothing. Down the street, Marshal Orrin Pike and his men had gathered the townsfolk in front of the courthouse. The flag hung limp in the still morning air. Dr. Ruth Avery stood near the steps, coat buttoned tight, papers clutched in one gloved hand. Evidence salvaged from Vale's coat and Kincaid's ledgers. "Ready?" Calder asked quietly. Eliza nodded, her fingers brushing the hymnal tucked under her arm. "Let's finish this." They walked side by side, boots squelching in the damp clay. The townspeople fell silent as the marshal raised a hand. "We got ourselves a reckoning," Pike said, voice deep, even. "Proof of forgery, extortion, and attempted murder. Names on these papers: Amos Kincaid, Mayor, and Prudence Crowley. bookkeeper of the Copper Bend mining office. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kincaid stood pale near the back, hat crushed in his hands. Eliza stepped forward. "You used my husband's death to steal this land," she said, her voice clear, steady. "You turned a town's grief into your ledger. But Copper Bend deserves better." Kincaid's lips trembled. "You think anyone'll believe a school teacher?" Calder's voice cut in, low but sharp. "They don't have to. The truth's right there." He nodded toward the documents Ruth held out. The confession signed by Marcus Vale before he died. Pike took it, unrolled the sheet, and read. Full admission of guilt. Names, dates, sums paid. He looked up. By the authority of the territory of Montana, I'm seizing all property stolen under these false claims and returning rightful deeds to their owners. That includes the land beneath this schoolhouse and the name of one Thomas Grace. Eliza's breath caught. She swallowed hard. Then the land stays with the people who built it. Pike nodded once. That's justice, Miss Hart. The crowd stirred, some murmuring approval, others shame. For the first time, Copper Bend's main street felt clean, scrubbed raw by rain and truth alike. Calder turned to Eliza. "You did it." She shook her head, a small, tired smile tugging her lips. "We did." He looked at her for a long moment, the morning light soft on his scarred face. Then, without a word, he went down on one knee, right there in the mud. "Eliza Hart," he said, voice rough but sure. "I ain't got much more than a name and a patch of land that keeps fighting me, but I've seen what a heart like yours can make out of nothing. If you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days learning how to deserve that." The crowd fell silent. Only the wind spoke, warm, sweet, carrying the sound of distant sparrows. Eliza's hand trembled as she touched his shoulder. "You don't have to deserve love, Calder. You just have to live it." He rose, eyes bright in the morning light. Ruth smiled quietly, tucking the papers away. "Looks like Copper Bend finally found its backbone." Marshal Pike tipped his hat. "And maybe its heart, too." The church bell rang once, clear and slow. Not for grief this time, but for something like rebirth. Eliza turned toward the sound. "The children will be here soon. We've got lessons to teach." Calder chuckled. "Startin' with me, I reckon." "You're already a better student than most," she said, lifting her face to the sun. Behind them, Juniper grazed near the fence, her foal dozing in the grass. The compass sat on the porch rail, steady for the first time since she'd come to Copper Bend, its needle pointing not west or north, but true home. Spring came slow to Copper Bend that year, not with thunder or fanfare, but with quiet persistence, as if the earth itself had grown tired of holding its breath. The snow melted from the ridge in long silver ribbons. Creeks ran fat and full again, their chatter carrying across the valley like laughter returning to an old house. The fields smelled of sage and thawing earth. On a hill just north of town, a new house stood, small, whitewashed, its porch facing the sunrise. The wind that once carried dust now swept through curtains of fresh linen, filling the rooms with light and the faint scent of pine resin. Eliza Hart, now Eliza Boone, moved slowly through the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair loose at her neck. A pot of coffee simmered on the stove. Near the window, Calder Boone worked a block of birchwood with his carving knife, shavings curling like ribbons around his boots. He'd been at it for weeks, shaping something both humble and sacred. A cradle, smooth and strong, carved with juniper leaves to match the handle of the spoon he'd once given her. "Almost done?" she teased, leaning on the doorframe. He smiled without looking up. "Good things take time. That's what you said about patching the barn roof. And wasn't I right?" She laughed. That quiet, full laugh that only came when she forgot to guard it. "Mostly, except when it leaks." He lifted the cradle, running a hand over its curve. "This one won't." Their eyes met. No more distance, no more secrets. Just the kind of ease that comes when two souls finally stop fighting the same storm. Outside, Juniper grazed in the field with her foal, a bright chestnut colt that chased its own shadow across the grass. The sight drew a smile from Eliza every time, a living reminder that even broken things can bear beauty again. Dr. Ruth Avery visited most Sundays now, bringing wild herbs and laughter in equal measure. The townsfolk of Copper Bend, once wary, now came with baskets of seeds, tools, and stories. The school had reopened, rebuilt by hands that finally remembered what community meant. Sometimes, after lessons, the children would wander up the hill to help Eliza plant her garden. They brought with them the same curiosity she'd once carried. Proof that hope, like anything worth keeping, needs to be taught anew each season. One evening, when the sky burned orange and the smell of rain hung sweet in the air, Eliza stood by the fence, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. Calder joined her quietly, his hand covering hers. "You feel it yet?" he asked softly. "Every heartbeat," she said, "like the earth underfoot." He nodded, looking out over the valley. "Never thought I'd build something that lasts." "You didn't build it alone," she said. He smiled, thumb brushing her wrist. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure about everything that matters." They watched as the last light slipped behind the ridge. In the distance, the church bell tolled once, not in mourning, but in habit, marking another day survived, another peace earned. Calder's voice was a low rumble. "When I first saw you, I thought you didn't belong here. Too fine for this rough land. And now? Now I think maybe you were the only thing that did." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. The scent of leather and pine, of rain and smoke wrapped around her. The scent of home. Inside, the cradle waited near the window. On the sill beside it, the brass compass lay still at last, its needle pointing east toward the rising sun. Beside it sat the wooden spoon, its surface worn smooth by years of use, and the hymnal open to a familiar page. Calder crossed the room and read aloud, his voice rough but steady. "The light shineth in darkness. darkness comprehended it not. Eliza finished softly. He closed the book, setting it back in its place. I never did read much scripture, he said, but I reckon that one I'll remember. She smiled. Because you lived it. Rain began to patter softly against the windows. Not a storm this time, just the gentle kind that makes the world smell new. Calder reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining easily, like roots in soft earth. I ever tell you what I prayed for when the marshal dragged me off the ridge that night? He asked. She shook her head. I prayed for one more dawn, he said. Didn't ask for land or peace or even mercy. Just one more sunrise to make something right. Eliza looked up at him, eyes bright. And you got it. He smiled faintly. Guess I did. Didn't expect it'd come with you. The rain thickened, drumming a soft rhythm on the porch roof. Juniper whinnied outside, her colt answering with a high, bright cry. Eliza stepped to the window, watching them run through the mist, two shadows made of grace. Behind her, Calder's voice was a low hum. We'll teach our child everything we didn't know, he said. How to read the sky, how to trust the quiet, how to stand tall when the wind gets mean. Eliza turned, tears glinting in the lamplight. And how to love, she whispered. That too, he said, every day. She crossed the room, took his hand, and placed it over her heart. Then it's already learned. The fire crackled softly. The rain eased. The air smelled of honey and wet grass. Calder drew her close, his voice a murmur in her hair. You carried winter with you when you came here. Now you're giving me spring. She smiled against his chest. No, Calder. We built it together. Outside, the valley shimmered under the pale moonlight, each blade of grass tipped with silver. The world was whole again, scarred, but beautiful. And as the night settled over their new home, the compass needle held steady, the hymnal's pages dried by firelight, and the sound of their laughter joined the rain. And so, as the lantern light fades on the Boone's porch, we leave Eliza and Calder standing hand in hand, proof that it's never too late to begin again. Their love wasn't built in grand moments, but in small, steadfast ones. A mended roof, a carved cradle, a hymn sung against the storm. In their quiet courage, we see the timeless truth of every Western heart, that even in the loneliest corners of the frontier, hope can still take root. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of an old love, a lesson learned, or a promise kept, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment spoke to you most? Please share it in the comments below. Your memories and reflections are what keep these tales alive. If you'd like more journeys like this, more Western tales of faith, forgiveness, and the kind of love that endures the dust and the years, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you'll never miss another story by the fire. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, may your days be calm, your coffee warm, and your heart as steady as a compass pointing home.